Hi, my name is Gurmeet Manku, and this video is about dietary guidelines by USDA, the Canadian Food Guide, and ACLM, and we will see how they have influenced my own food plates. Let's begin with the ACLM food plate. ACLM is actually American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and they have carved out something called a whole food plant-based food plate. On the left-hand side, we see a colorful medley of fruits and vegetables. Some can be cooked, some are raw. It's kind of a salad if you want to visualize it that way. On the right-hand side are calorie-dense plant foods, whole grains, and beans, peas, lentils. We can call them pulses, or we can just use the word beans for them, and some nuts and seeds. And B12 is essential if we make our food plate plant only. Some herbs and spices, and beverages, water. Okay, this is the ACLM food plate. So what is ACLM? ACLM is American College of Lifestyle Medicine. So this is actually a specialty in mainstream medicine. So medical doctors in USA have carved it out, and we can get board certified to practice lifestyle medicine today. Just like we get a license to practice cardiology, internal medicine, or rheumatology, we can get a license to practice lifestyle medicine. So I'm emphasizing the point that it's mainstream medicine. It's not fringe medicine or alternative medicine. So in this video, I'm going to compare three food plates: USDA food plate, Canadian Food Guide, and the ACLM. And now I'll compare it from two perspectives. There is the plant-based aspects, and there is the whole food aspect. Let's look at the plant-based aspect first. Okay, let's start with USDA food plate. USDA food plate has 5 components. 5 are fruits, vegetables, grains, dairy, and protein. Okay, out of these 5, 4 of them are foods that we can recognize because we can see them. They are tangible foods, like we can touch them, smell them. Fruits, vegetables, grains, and dairy. But protein, this part of the guideline, it is not a tangible thing. We can't touch a protein, we can't smell it. It's not an actual food, right? So we have to understand where protein comes from. Okay, so I just thought I'll point it out. Among the 5, protein is one of the 5 with this feature. They also have 3 eating patterns. They are called healthy US style, healthy Mediterranean style, and healthy vegetarian style. Okay, and they don't tell us pick one or the other. We have a choice. We may choose any of these 3. That's my understanding of the guideline. Now, for dairy, they have guidelines like if we can choose to use fortified soy version if we feel like. Right? It's one of the options. Okay, so if we choose fortified soy versions, this beverage starts becoming plant only. Okay. For protein foods, they mention, this quadrant, the protein part. They say if we choose a healthy vegetarian dietary pattern, then we may choose to get protein from plants. And they give examples: soy products, beans, peas, lentils, nuts and seeds, whole grains. Okay, so if we were to choose protein from plants, and for the beverage part, if we use fortified soy versions, then our entire food plate becomes plant only. Okay, so it's kind of a healthy vegetarian with plant only as the food plate composition. Okay, I just thought I'll point it out. Okay, now USDA food guidelines are made every 5 years. So there is a scientific committee that comes up with very long reports, and then another committee finalizes the report, and that becomes the guideline for the next 5 years. So here is what the scientific report of the 2020 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. I found this fascinating, so I'm just sharing it with you. Okay, so they mentioned the 3 styles that I just mentioned in the previous plate: the US healthy style, the healthy vegetarian style, healthy Mediterranean style patterns, right? These 3 ways of composing food plates. Now here comes the interesting sentence. The core components of all 3, majority of energy comes from plant-based foods such as fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds. So that's what it said. Okay, it's insightful to see this sentence here. Okay, one more interesting tidbit which I chanced upon is in 2020. AMA is American Medical Association. Okay, this is like the medical association in USA. It's American Medical Association. So they actually sent a letter to the scientific committee which was coming up with those reports. So this letter to the Dietary Guidelines for Americans Committee, they said, please clearly indicate in the dietary guidelines that meat and dairy products are optional. Okay, what is the request? Let's try to see. They're just saying, make it clear that these 2 components, meat and dairy, are optional. So I just showed you that they do allow for healthy vegetarian, right? And we can make it plant only if we choose to. But it's in text here and there. It's not very obvious. So all they're saying is please clearly indicate. Okay, so I just thought I'll point it out that AMA is requesting DGSE to do this. Okay, so Canadian Food Guide looks like this. On the left-hand side is a colorful medley of fruits and vegetables, some cooked, some uncooked. Okay, if you want, we can visualize it as a rainbow-colored salad, some cooked, some not cooked. Okay, they have grains. For grains, they say choose whole grains, and they're kind of showing it brown in color, right, to remind us that like brown rice or whole wheat tends to be brown in color, right? Okay, for the protein part, they are showing visually half of these proteins are kind of meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. And you can see the dairy component. To me, it looks like it's comparable to a quarter of an egg. Okay, and then they also show plant proteins here, which is beans, peas, lentils, or we can call them legumes or just beans to make it succinct. And they have nuts and seeds. And okay, and for water, for the beverage, they are saying water. Okay, now comes the interesting part. They say choose proteins from plants more often. So where do they say that, right? So here is the picture, and here is the text from Canada's food guide. They have lots of interesting details, which we can delve into to really make nice food plates. But let's focus on this sentence, which says choose protein foods that come from plants more often. Okay, it says it right here. So they have a preference for plants, but they haven't said, is it okay to make it 100% plants? What does more mean, right? They have not clearly specified it, okay? But they have a preference for plants. Okay, so now we're in a position to compare the three food plates. In USA, there's a healthy vegetarian pattern in which if we choose to, we can make it plant only, okay? But they're not saying choose this or lean towards it. They're saying it's an option, okay? Canadian Food Guide says choose proteins from plants more often, but they're not saying make it 100%. ACLM says make it 100%. Okay, so it's kind of, that's how I understand what these guidelines look like. The amazing thing is that a lot of the food plate is actually common. Okay, what are the common things? Fruits and vegetables. In all three guidelines, half the food plate visually is fruits and vegetables, the left half. Another common thing is the grain part. You know, grains, it's called whole grains here, whole grains here. Amazing. What is the debate? The debate is in the protein section. Okay, so do you see what's going on? So I choose to go for the ACLM food plate, which says plant only, and that is my choice. Now the dairy part, the beverage part, is dairy in USDA guidelines. It's water in Canadian Food Guide and it's water in the ACLM food plate. So I go for the ACLM food plate with water. Okay, I just thought I'll point out these fascinating interconnections between these three food plates. Here comes the Indian food plate. Again, so much is in common. Half of it is fruits and vegetables, and they have an actual picture, which, it's more appealing to the eye. We actually get attracted to actual foods. It's an actual picture, which I love. The grains are also an actual picture, and they are being called cereals and nutri-cereals, which is the terminology used to refer to whole grains and millets in India. Okay. Now, this quadrant, this part of the food plate, is very similar to what I showed you. For example, the beverage is milk or curd, and they show meat, fish, eggs. They also show beans, peas, lentils, or we can call them pulses. They also show nuts and seeds. Now here comes the interesting part. Okay, they also show fats and oils. Okay, now in the Canadian Food Guide and the ACLM Food Guide and the USDA, the fats and oils were not being shown as part of the visual food plates that they have constructed. Okay, so this is something unique to the Indian food plate as compared to the three I showed you. So my request to people who are designing Indian food plates is, the Canadian Food Guide leans towards plants and the ACLM says plant only. Okay, I really request people in India to study the ACLM food plate. What is the basis of their guidelines? Like, what makes them say that? A lot of it is coming from, metabolic conditions. For example, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, hypertension. And there are amazing interventional studies showing that, the heart disease rate just plummets if somebody adopts ACLM food plates. And for that, we'll have to look into Esselstyn studies and Ornish studies. We have interventional studies for diabetes also. Amazing drop in diabetes rates, right? And obesity. So there are all these interventional studies, and there are also epidemiological studies. There are cultures who have followed similar food plate composition, and they have stunningly low rates of all these modern NCDs, non-communicable diseases. Okay, so I hope this Indian food plate meanders or gravitates towards the Canadian Food Guide or the ACLM Food Guide in the next iteration. So I'm making some videos to the best of my ability to showcase how many different organizations, some of them are government organizations, some of these are medical organizations, and there are also defense organizations, okay? IDF, USDA, for example, okay? So I'm making videos to showcase how many of the organizations are actually saying adopt whole food plant-based guidelines or leaning towards these guidelines. So I'm kind of painting a picture. You could watch these videos if you feel like, okay, let's look at the whole food part of the guideline. So I just showed you the plant-based part, ACLM is basically saying, plant only. Let's come to the whole food part. This is complicated. It has to do with whether we are eating natural foods or processed foods. And this is kind of details come in here. It's not a simple guideline, okay? But we can make some progress by looking at these 4 or 5 main points. Ultra-processed foods, ACLM says, please don't have them, right? Refined grains, they will say, no, take whole grains. And I would say the more interesting part is in the oil and sugar guidelines. So we have three macronutrients: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. So we can start extracting them. If we extract proteins, it starts becoming protein isolates or protein powders, but they're not very common in our food plates. So ACLM is not talking about them. Oil and sugar are much more prevalent. So they take a position on oil and sugar. Oils are fat extracts and sugars are carbohydrate extracts. And they're saying, please eat whole foods. So these are extracts. So they discourage them. And in fact, they say, don't touch them. No sugar, no oil. Okay. Salt, they will say, reduce. Right. And by the way, they also have this smoking and alcohol thing. But let's look at these 4-5 guidelines and compare ACLM with USDA and Canadian Food Guide as to how much harmony exists between all of them. Here is the refined grain versus whole grain guideline. So USDA says make half of your grains whole grains. Canadian Food Guide says choose whole grain. ACLM says whole grains. Okay, I have come to understand that whole grains are better because whole grains have all three parts: the germ, the bran, and the endosperm. So the germ and the bran have a lot of micronutrients. So I prefer whole grains, just like ACLM Food Guide says, and Canadian Food also says that, and USDA also says that make half your grains whole grains. Okay, so whole grains is a very important guideline. So that's why I choose whole grains. Okay, ultra processed foods. So technically, they come. One way to conceptualize them is the NOVA food classification system. Maybe I'll make a video on the NOVA food classification system someday. But let's look at Canadian Food Guide. So many sentences are about UPFs or highly processed foods. So what do they say? They say limit highly processed foods. If you choose this food, eat them less often and in small amounts. They say be aware that food marketing can influence your choices. They say replace sugary drinks with water. They also say choose healthier menu options when eating out. Kind of the theme. What is the theme here? It's very obvious. They're kind of saying, the first one kind of says that, limit these foods, eat them less often, small amounts. ACLM says, just don't touch them. Okay, so it's a tightening of this guideline. That's how I interpret ACLM and the Canadian Food Guide. So Canadian Food has too many sentences. ACLM will say, don't have them. Okay, okay. So let's look at the sugar guideline. So Canadian Food Guide says, prepare meals and snacks using ingredients that have little to no added sodium, sugar, or saturated fat. So no added sugars, little to no added. Okay. Now, the word is ingredients. So ingredients can be actual sugars, or they can be things like, sauces or what are they called? Sauces or broths or spice mixes or maybe ketchup or something, right? So some of these mixes, which is not just one food, they might have added sugars, right? They might be, so they say, all the ingredients we are using, little to no added sugars. Okay, I love the word no. So there's a reason for me enjoying the word no, because, if they say little to no, then the no tells me that, no is an option. Otherwise, it's not clear. When they say limit, is no okay? Like 0 of something, is that okay? Maybe I should have a little bit, so that confusion remains in my mind. But when I see a no, to me, it sends a clear message. Okay, little to no means no is an option, and maybe I should go for no. Okay, so I go for no added sugars. Just like ACLM says, ACLM is not fond of extracts. They have a whole food philosophy, right? Whole foods are whole foods. Sugars are extracts, carbohydrate extracts. So they will say, no, get actual whole foods. So for sugar, we can add dates. For example, dates are so sweet, and date is a whole food. Okay. So next comes salt. So so Canadian Food Guide says little or no added sodium, and I love the no part. Okay, so I personally follow the no added sodium guideline. It's a very difficult guideline to follow. No added sodium. We have to change our food plates in a dramatic way because we don't have a good sodium substitute. Okay. ACLM says something similar. So I wish ACLM had said no added sodium, just like they're saying no added sugar or something, right? But they don't really say no added sodium. They have a similar guideline, reduce it, and a salt-free system is also okay. But if we go for salt-free, we have to take care of iodine intake, and the recipe composition changes big time. Okay, oils. So Canadian Food Guide doesn't mention oils, right? But they mention something. So let's see what they mention. Little to no added saturated fat, and they say healthy fats instead of saturated fat. So they're saying change the nature of the fat, but they have nothing to say about low fat or no oil or anything, right? Now this is where ACLM differs from the Canadian Food Guide in a dramatic way. ACLM takes a position, low fat. Low fat is defined as less than 15% fat, and actually some doctors will say go to 10%, 12%. Some doctors will take us even lower. So kind of there's a push in the whole food plant-based community to go for low fats, and ACLM has 15%. And they also say no oils. Okay, how do they say that? So they will say total fat intake less than 15%, and obtained from whole unprocessed plant sources. What is whole unprocessed plant sources? These are basically nuts and seeds, if you're eating nuts and seeds, or avocados or soy foods. But actually, we get fats from many other sources also, okay, in trace amounts, and they start summing up, okay. So these are all details of where to get fats from. I'll skip the details. I'll defer to another video. Let's highlight the whole unprocessed part, and even EFAs, essential fatty acids, we should get them from actual unprocessed plant sources, and this basically is saying no oil, okay. So no oil and 10% fat. So this might surprise people that this is an unusual guidelines from the standpoint of guidelines which we already might have seen. Okay, so I just covered all these points. So what do we eat? Okay, most of the calories in my food plates is coming from fruits and vegetables and grains and beans. A few nuts and seeds. Recently, I have reduced my nuts and seeds also, and I'll come to all these details in some other video. Herbs and spices, a few mushrooms, supplements, B12 in particular. Okay. Now the challenge is, how do you make tasty food out of this? Okay, so there are ways to make tasty, flavorful foods out of this. Now here comes the best part, and which brings me personal joy, which is, in India we have something called nature cure or naturopathy guidelines. Okay, so and they are protected and promoted by Ayush Ministry in Government of India. Okay, and Mahatma Gandhi used to be a big fan of nature cure naturopathy. In fact, Naturopathy Day in India has a connection with what Mahatma Gandhi did at some point of time. Okay, now what are the food aspects of nature cure naturopathy? Okay, the food plates center around what is listed here: Kand Mool Phal Phul Patti Pani, which is a Hindi phrase. It basically means different types of fruits and vegetables, grains and beans, nuts and seeds, and herbs and spices. Okay. Amazingly, the same food groups is what ACLM has identified as being amazing from all these perspectives. It's a very high fiber diet. It is highly anti-inflammatory. I'll explain that in a video I will make on the dietary inflammatory index. It is supremely anti-cancer diet. I already made a video on that if somebody has seen it. AICR Foods That Fight Cancer. That's the title of the video, in which I'm showcasing what AICR is teaching us and how it resonates with these food plates. Heart healthy guidelines. I'll make a couple of videos to showcase, interventional studies by Dean Ornish and especially Dr. S.L. Stein. What has demonstrated? Some stunning results. Okay, what are those results? So I'll go through all these details. And in fact, from those papers by S.L. Stein and a few others, I learned that there exist some populations in the world whose food plates look similar, like the rural Kenyans, the Tarahumara, the Papua New Guinean people, even Okinawans. Their food plates look like not exactly like this, similar to this, and many of them have zero heart disease. So I was stunned when I heard zero heart disease. Okay, I couldn't believe it. So I actually dug into the references, and I learned, yeah, it's actually zero. So can other populations like me or you, can people like us have zero heart disease? Is it even possible? So we have to dig into literature and understand what has S.L. Stein done. We really need to replicate the studies all over the world to be assured, yeah, it works for all populations. But so far, the medical evidence that has emerged is it's good to study what he says. Okay, that's all I'm saying. So all these studies inspired me, and I see these beautiful connections between whole food plant-based guidelines and the Kand Mool Phal Phul Patti Pani with some grains and beans, nuts and seeds system, which is basically the foundation for naturopathy guidelines. Okay, so I thought I'll just leave a few names here to get started. Now, naturopathy, there are hundreds and possibly thousands of practitioners in India. Many of them don't have websites. They're not making YouTube videos. So a few prominent practitioners who have YouTube videos, who have a web presence, they have web pages, are these 3-4. There are many more. I'm just listing 3-4. So Dr. Achyutaneshwar in Bangalore. The amazing thing about him is that he's trained in naturopathy, and he has also acquired whole food plant-based vocabulary. So his website and the way he talks both languages. So it's a unique person, right, who speaks both languages. So he's in Bangalore. Dr. Gurmail Singh Virk. He's actually an allopathic doctor. For 30 years, he was in hospital. He became the CMO, a chief medical officer of a hospital in Punjab somewhere. And now he has set up a naturopathy clinic. So the amazing thing is, he knows both vocabularies. The allopathic vocabulary and how to treat people using allopathic medicine. He also knows nature cure. Okay, so it's how many people will you find who know both systems well? So I find him such a valuable person these days, right? So it's amazing to talk to him and understand both systems. There's also Mohan Gupta. So he speaks Hindi. I think he speaks Punjabi and English also, but I think most of his videos are in Hindi. He's in Delhi, and he has an amazing lineage. Just study who did he learn this from and who his teachers are. So they are like, what do you call it? Big shots, or in naturopathy. So just study them, who these people are. There's also in Andhra Pradesh, there is Dr. Satya Narayanan Mansanaraju, and he speaks Telugu. I think all Telugu speakers have heard that he exists. He used to come on television. They know of him. But just study them. What is he teaching? And I have friends who have done advanced classes with him, and he simplifies these food systems further. The advanced guidelines that he has, and see what he's teaching. It's fascinating. So these are just 3-4 people. There are many others who speak local languages who are not on the web. Just find these people and see what they're teaching, and see what the interconnections are with ACLM food plates, and how these food plates become high fiber, anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, heart friendly, and there is science behind them. Okay, so we can kind of validate these food plates today on the basis of amazing amount of science. Okay, all right. So motivated by whatever I showed you, my food plate started going towards towards a raw food system. Okay, this is a tough food system. I don't think I have become 100% skillful, but I'm going in that direction. So only when I've followed it consistently for, I would say, 2-3 years, can I say, okay, I have now actually followed it. I just got started last year. It's been a few months, maybe 1 year now. So this is kind of my food plate. For breakfast, this is my lunch. They look similar. The breakfast is sweetish, the lunch is savory, and maybe this is not the best possible food composition from nature cure practitioner's perspective, but I'm making progress step by step. This is what I do today. I just thought I'll share some food plates and how I do it. Okay, and I have simplified my food processing to as simple as this. I just need 2 sharp knives and a honing rod, and that's all I do. Okay. I have a website called Thankful to Plants in which I'm collecting information. And if you like these videos, please like and subscribe and share. Thank you so much.